And he says, Mr. Franzese, you got anything you want to say to the court? And I'll never forget, Dad. You looked at him, you shook your head for a minute, and you said, yeah, Your Honor. It was Judge Jacob Mishler. He said, I'm going to fool you and everybody in this courtroom. I'm going to do the whole 50 years. That's what he said to the judge. And you know, it was 50 years actually to the day, okay, that my father walked out of that prison, because I'll never forget, he looked at me and he said, you know what? I keep my word even to that rat judge. I ain't dying until 2017. And that was 50 years to the day. Hello everyone, welcome to another sit down with Michael Franzese, and hope everybody is doing well. I had a great week and hope all of you had a similar experience. Good week for all of you. I'm going to give you all of you an opportunity to send me what movie you would like me to review, because I'm getting so many, some of them I never even heard of, but I'm going to pick the ones that I think best depict or portray that life. But send me your comments. We're working on that. We're going to put it together. And I get asked all the time about individual people. A lot of people want to know about Persico, Carmine Persico. Obviously, I know a lot about him. He was my boss, the boss of the Colombo family. Joe Colombo, obviously, I had a relationship with him before he passed away. People ask me about Roy DeMeo. I think I spoke a little bit about him, about Greg Scarpa, who I knew very well. He was one of our guys who was part of our family. I'm going to get into that at some point. Little Vic Arena, you may not know who he is, but he was a captain in our family that led the revolt against Persico in the early 90s when the family went to war. I knew Vic since the time I was a kid. So I'm going to be getting into my relationship and some of the stories about these people that I know. And today I'm going to start with somebody very, very familiar to me, because I get asked this all the time, and that is my father, Sonny Franzese. So I'm going to talk a little bit about him. Obviously, I could make a movie about him. I could speak for days about him. I knew him all my life. He is my father. He brought me into the life. But I'll give you a little bit of his history because it is very interesting. My dad, as you know, he died, many of you know, in February at the age of 103. He was the oldest living made man, guy that took the oath in America, quite possibly in the entire world at the time of his death. I don't think there's anybody that outlived my father. And my father's story is very interesting because he was there throughout the whole formation of organized crime, La Cosa Nostra Mafia in this country. My dad was born in 1917. A little bit history before that, my grandfather, Carmine Franzese, they called him Tootie the Lion, very powerful guy, came to this country, I think around 1905, 1910, somewhere like that. And he set up shop. He resided in Brooklyn, in the Greenpoint section of Brooklyn, him and my grandmother. They went on to have 19 children. My dad was one of 19. There was 15 girls, 4 boys. And my dad, out of the 4 boys, was the only one that became a member of that life. But my grandfather, he had a bakery on the corner of Jackson and Leonard Street, which is in the Greenpoint section. He had a bakery. My father used to work for him. And my grandfather was a very well-respected guy. He could have been part of this life. He could have become a member, but he didn't want that. And as a matter of fact, when my father was recruited to become a member of that life, my grandfather tried to talk him out of it. He said, you know, my father's name is John. He said, son, John, your life is not your own once you become a member of that life. And he did try to talk him out of it, but this is what my father wanted. My father early on caught the eye of many of the mob guys that used to hang in my grandfather's bar and cafe there. And he was an amateur boxer growing up. He was a tough kid, very, very well respected, and he caught the eye of made guys, and that's how he eventually got involved in life. A lot of people ask where my father was born. My father was actually born in Italy, in Naples, on a boat trip. My grandfather and grandmother used to go back to Italy almost every year by boat, and he was born during one of those trips. So he is an American citizen, because they were naturalized here. My grandfather was. If that wasn't the case, my father probably would have been deported later on because of his activity in organized crime. But that's kind of the back history. And the reason, I don't know if you know this, but organized crime really grew in America in the early 1900s. And early on, there were a lot of Jewish guys that were involved in that life. It wasn't La Cosa Nostra as we know it today. There was a lot of prominent Jewish guys like Arnold Rothstein, big figure in this life early on. As a matter of fact, he was the mentor for Lucky Luciano. Luciano learned a lot from him. Meyer Lansky, as you know, a very close partnership with Lucky Luciano. Bugsy Siegel, prominent member at that time. These were Jewish guys. Murder Incorporated, a guy named Louis Lepke, I forget, Bookwalter his name was. He was pretty much the mastermind of Murder Incorporated, which is a prominent group of a lot of Jews at that time during the formation of La Cosa Nostra here, of the organized crime in America, that committed a lot of murders. This is historical. And by the way, people, I want to make this clear. I'm not glorifying the life. I'm giving you a history lesson. You can't deny that organized crime played a major role in the United States, especially in the big cities like New York and Chicago and so on. It's part of our history. So I'm just telling it. I'm not glorifying it. As you know, I left the life. If I was glorifying it, I'd probably still be in it, or I'd be dead or in prison as a result, one of the two. So I'm just telling a story, and I don't glorify the life. But my dad did know Arnold Rothstein, did meet him. He did meet Lucky Luciano. He did meet Frank Costello. He met all of those people during the real formation of La Cosa Nostra during that time. And again, my father was mentored by a guy by the name of Sally the Sheik. He was a made guy in the Colombo family, and he kind of took my father under his wing, and my father was mentored from Sally the Sheik. And I'll tell you how my father kind of grew to prominence, and obviously I'm skipping around. I can't go into the whole history. I'll be here for days. I want to tell you a little bit how my father rose to prominence. I want to answer another question too about nepotism in that life. I told you my grandfather could have been a part of that life, and at that point probably would have brought my father into it. Nepotism in La Cosa Nostra is huge. Why? For security reasons. Carlo Gambino brought his son Tommy Gambino and some of his nephews into that life. Joe Colombo brought his son Anthony and Joey Jr. into the life. Persico brought his son Allie Boy and Michael into the life, and on and on and on and on. Okay, this is a prominent part of that life. My father obviously brought me into that life. Why? Because of security reasons. You know their past, you know their history. So many people in La Cosa Nostra are related, through brother, father, whatever. And I can go on and on with that. So understand nepotism is a major part of that life. So my dad starts to rise through the ranks. He gets noticed. I think at the age of 33 or 34, he took the oath. And shortly after that, we had a war in the Colombo family, the Gallo-Profaci War. At that time, it was the Profaci family. Colombo hadn't taken over yet. But the Gallos during that war, and it's always a power struggle, a war for leadership, the Gallos had kidnapped 4 members of the Profaci family, Joe Colombo being one of them, Sally the Sheik being another. And they tried to negotiate with Profaci, number one, for money. They wanted to hold ransom. It was Albert and Joey Gallo at the time that did the kidnapping. They were brothers. And I think Albert talked Joey out of the ransom money, but they wanted certain things available to them that Profaci had to give into. And the interesting thing is at that time, they asked for my father to come in and to negotiate to try to get the release of those hostages. Why did they ask my father? They trusted him. He was trusted on both sides. Profaci faction trusted him. The Gallo-Profaci trusted him. So my father was brought in to negotiate the release of the hostages, which he successfully did. And my dad told me when he walked into that room to pull these hostages out, he didn't know if he was going to walk out again. That's how volatile the situation was. But my dad was successful in obtaining the release based upon whatever the negotiation was. And I don't want to get into all of that. But that was one of the reasons why my father was well respected. And after Colombo took over the Colombo family, my father was made underboss as a result of that because he held such a prominent position. So that's kind of how my father started to rise through the ranks. Unfortunately, for some reason, he did become a major target of law enforcement, and that eventually was his downfall. I think I've told the story before of Bobby Kennedy really having it in for my father because there was a prior relationship with my dad and Marilyn Monroe, and Kennedy found out about it, and he was very upset, and as a result, he ordered J. Edgar Hoover, head of the FBI at that time, to go after my father. And in the early 60s, my father was indicted several times, both on a state and a federal level, went to trial 3 times, beat all of those cases, once for murder, once for grand larceny, and I think twice for grand larceny, beat those cases. But then he was eventually indicted in federal court, got convicted for masterminding a nationwide string of bank robberies, sentenced to 50 years in prison. I'm going to give you one story about my dad that kind of really sums up who he was. And this happened while he was in prison. My mother had just passed away. It was in 2012. Now remember, my dad was sentenced in 1967. He actually started his prison term in 1970. And I went to visit him. My mom had passed away. We tried to get him released to go to the funeral. We had offered to pay for the marshals, the whole bit. The Bureau of Prisons wouldn't allow it, right? So I go and visit him. Bureau of Prisons, they gave me a special visit that day. They allowed me to go into the attorney's room with my dad. Normally you have to stay in the visiting room, but they allowed me to go into the attorney's room so I can have a personal visit with him. I get into the room, and my dad was not himself. He was depressed, and I've never seen my dad depressed in my whole life. Never saw him depressed. And so we're chatting a little bit, and finally I stopped and said, "Hey, Dad, what's the matter with you?" He said, what do I got to live for? He said, you know, my wife is dead. They wouldn't even allow me to go to the funeral. We're together 60 some odd years. He said, my son, real problem. He testified against me, meaning my younger brother, John. He had a drug problem all his life. He said, I lost my daughter to drugs. He said, I'm probably going to die in this prison. What do I got to live for? And I looked at him and I said, hey, Dad, are you getting weak on me? And with that, he kind of stood up. He said, what do you mean by that? I said, let me remind you of something. 1967, we're in Judge Midler's courtroom. He just sentenced you to 50 years in prison. He gave you 2 25-year sentences running wild, consecutive, back-to-back, 50 years. Okay, courtroom is jammed. He turns to you. I know I was sitting right behind you, Dad. And he says, Mr. Franzese, you got anything you want to say to the court? And I'll never forget, Dad. You looked at him. You shook your head for a minute, and you said, yeah, Your Honor. It was Judge Jacob Mishler. He said, I'm going to fool you and everybody in this courtroom. I'm going to do the whole 50 years. That's what he said to the judge. And you know, it was 50 years actually to the day, okay, that my father walked out of that prison, because I'll never forget, he looked at me and he said, you know what? I keep my word even to that rat judge. I ain't dying until 2017. And that was 50 years to the day that my father was released from prison. And during that time, the judge died, the prosecutor died, all his co-defendants died, the witnesses were all died. He outlived them all. But that was the kind of guy my father was. Okay, kept his word even to that judge. So give you a little bit insight into his character. He was special in that way. He was really an old timer. I didn't know too many guys that were like him. And fortunately, he was my mentor during that time. And I learned a lot from my dad. I've spoken about that in other videos. I could talk about it for days, but he was a very special guy. I do miss him. I do love him. Our relationship had changed a little bit. You know, he was a little disappointed, obviously, when I walked away from that life, but he understood, because he knew that I wanted to preserve my life and my family's life. And look, quietly and secretly, my dad had conversations about that life, and we both knew the good and the bad of it. And of course, he would admit it to me, even though he may not admit it to others. So that's kind of a summation of my dad, and maybe at another time we'll go into a lot more stories. So that's it for today. I want to thank all of you that have been subscribing to these videos. You know, we're way over 100,000 now, and it keeps growing. Got a lot of good things coming up, people. Going to be doing a lot of interviews. The first one probably with Bruce McNall, because he lives in LA. You know who Bruce is. I told you the story about him. He owned the LA Kings, Gretzky, big movie producer, a lot of stuff. And we're going to be doing Donnie Brasco. Joe Pistone, he and I will be sitting down. And people, I don't interview these people. I chat with them. We share stories and ideas different than what you've seen before on other platforms. Going to be doing Darryl Strawberry, Mike Tyson. Mike is fighting on September 12th. Going to probably go to the fight, but after he finishes his training and everything, I'll get him to sit down. Two guys from Brooklyn. We're going to talk about a lot of things. Got a lot of great content coming up. So subscribe. When you subscribe, you get alerts that these things are happening. I want to thank all of you. There's a lot of content on YouTube, and so many of you have been tuning in for me, and we really appreciate it. Thank you very much. For those of you who have joined my crew, michaelfranzese.com, we're building, we're growing, we already have over 3,600 members that are sharing ideas and encouraging thoughts and good information, and I'm jumping in, providing content for all of you. This is a full-time job, by the way, doing these videos, providing the content, but we care. This is why we're doing it. For those of you that want more personal relationship with me, you want me to answer some questions that I can't really get to on YouTube, okay, we have our inner circle. There is a slight fee. It's not a lot of money. We're not breaking the bank, I promise you. But, I'm putting a lot of time into this, and I'm giving you leadership skills and talking about business. I'm getting a lot of questions about that. We're doing Zoom calls 2 or 3 times a month, and we're going to be providing a lot more content. So thank all of you for your loyalty, for coming aboard. We're going to continue the stories, continue providing great content. God bless you all. Have a great rest of your day.